Kirby and the Forgotten Land left a pretty big impression on me when it first came out. For years, I'd wanted Kirby to escape 2D platformer jail and try something new in 3D. Kirby and the Forgotten Land came out, and it was utterly fantastic. Finally, we could see what a Kirby game and his various copy abilities could be like when not stuck to a 2D plane. And it's not just Kirby in 3D, there was a ton of brand new ideas here on offer as well. Copy abilities could be upgraded, taking on new forms, being stronger, giving you access to new moves. And of course, we have to talk about Mouthful Mode. Mouthful Mode made Kirby capable of doing all kinds of weird stuff, and that's exactly what I want from Kirby. Kirby doing weird stuff. Whether it's becoming a car and driving through the world, breaking stuff and finding collectibles, or just becoming a giant staircase and smashing stuff, there's a lot of variety on offer in Kirby and the Forgotten Land. It's not the lengthiest adventure, there's only a few worlds on offer, and each world only has a few levels as well as some extra challenges. But what they built here was an incredibly tight, satisfying, and fun 3D platformer with Kirby at the helm. That said, the game does have some problems. John covered this in his video, but the game is capped to 30 frames per second, it experiences some dips, and objects in the distance have decimated frame rates, so they look slower than they should. And of course, the game was a little fuzzy, being on Nintendo Switch 1, but they've gone and fixed a bunch of these problems with Kirby and the Forgotten Land Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Starcrossed World. Now, the game runs at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second, there still is some decimated FPS going on in the backgrounds, and wow, this is one of the most stunning games on Nintendo Switch 2. The game was already gorgeous, but being able to see it in a much higher resolution makes the game shine so much more than it could on Switch 1. It helps you appreciate a lot of the smaller details around this world. The particle effects, just how round Kirby is. Kirby has never been this round. So if you like round little guys, the upgrade's gonna be worth it. But unlike some other Nintendo Switch 2 editions and other Switch 1 free updates, Kirby and the Forgotten Land comes with basically a new campaign called Starcrossed World. The story is that an evil comet falls down into the Forgotten Land and spreads a bunch of these starry creatures throughout the world. You'll go from level to level, collecting starries and bringing them back to the comet, pretty much the exact same setup as the Lost Waddle Dees in the original Forgotten Land campaign. But rather than entirely new levels, Kirby and the Forgotten Land plus Starcrossed World reuses stages from the original game, but remixes them. And remix is probably not even the most appropriate word, because these stages really do transform. You'll find them covered in this crystal starry goop that is oddly delicious looking. I do want to know what it tastes like. But these areas create these new platforms, and they take you in directions that the original levels didn't ever take you before. One big example we saw in trailers leading up to the game's release was the Carnival World, where now you're actually running around on the roller coaster itself, seeing parts of the map that we never got to see before. This is a great example of asset reuse done right. The new remix levels are among the best in the game. The first few in the grassy areas start off kind of slow, kind of basic. They just kind of get you comfortable with the idea of what's going on in Starcrossed World, introducing you to some of the new mouthful modes, of which there are 3. You have the spring, the gear, and the sign. The spring is the first one that's introduced to you, and for what it's worth, it's pretty basic. If you've played Super Mario Galaxy and used the spring power-up in that game, you kind of know what you're getting into here, though I much prefer the way it controls in this game over Super Mario Galaxy. The gear lets you spider ball your way across walls just like you would in Metroid, and they do some really creative stuff with it. Not only are you going to be climbing up walls, but you'll be jumping from wall to wall, and it feels really good to pull off. They designed a lot of fun challenges around this concept, and I think it might be among the strongest new material in the game. Lastly, we have the signboard, which at first I thought looked kind of lame, but then I realized what it actually is. This is just an evolution of slide levels from Super Mario 64, and they're a ton of fun. You'll go down these big slides at a relatively high speed, but you have the ability to attack enemies by spinning, and when you do this, you get a speed boost. So you're incentivized to hit every enemy you see coming in order to get the best time possible. There are, of course, hidden collectibles and pathways on these courses, so it's worth playing them multiple times, especially if you didn't get it the first time. Thankfully, just like in the original game, they include a little retry star at the end of these challenges so you can quickly give it another go. As I mentioned earlier, the level design feels a tiny bit more complex than what you'd find in the base game of Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Enemies are also tougher. The game is pushing back a little bit more than it typically does. I played through the game on Wild Mode, which is the quote-unquote hard mode. And in the original game, I really had no pushback at all, even all the way through the 3 arena cups at the end of the game. But this time around, I did find myself getting close to dying on a few occasions. That said, in my entire runtime of the DLC, I only died twice. So it's still a Kirby game, it's still going to be relatively easy, but the new content is super fun and really engaging. Another thing that surprised me is that in the original game, I could very often do all of the hidden challenges and find all of the Waddle Dees on my first playthrough of a level. That was almost exclusively not the case in Starcrossed World. More often than not, I'd finish a level with 1 or 2 challenges not completed, and on one occasion, a hidden starry that I couldn't find. I can't tell if they're hidden better or if I'm just not as sharp as I was years ago when this game first came out. But it was a bit refreshing to find that I couldn't just steamroll through the game on my first try. A lot of you have probably been wondering how much new content there actually is, and I think it's deceptive. I think people are saying, oh, it only takes a few hours to complete, and thinking that the new content is limited or small. But if you really look at the world map, there's only 4 full-on levels in every world of the game. And in Starcrossed World, 2 of those 4 get remixed versions. There are no new additional challenge levels on top of that, but there are new figures to collect. So when you break it down, there are 12 essentially new levels of the game to play, and that is a significant amount. That's about 3 worlds worth of the original game's content. Plus you have the starries that you have to find, as well as all of the new gacha figures that you have to find. While there might only be 12 new Starcrossed World levels in the game, they're fairly chunky. There's a lot going on in these levels, and several of them will have you going for much longer than you might otherwise think. This is both a blessing and a curse, because if you miss 1 or 2 starries in a level, you have a lot of level to go back through in order to find them. And that's a good or a bad thing depending on the person. I completed the first 3 or 4 worlds, but by that point I was ready to see what the final boss was going to be and what the story had to offer. But now that I'm done, I can go back and clean some of those up. Some of the levels have new baked-in challenges, such as these timer flower stars. When you hit them, platforms will appear and you'll have a limited amount of time in order to get to the end and see what it is. Sometimes they're optional, sometimes they're part of standard stage progression, but I found them to be a neat way to add a little bit of that challenge from the challenge levels into the actual levels themselves. I do wish that they had included more bosses in Starcrossed World, but they backloaded most of them to the arena. And while it made the arena experience really fun, I do feel like something was missing from the actual Starcrossed World campaign. It's not a huge thing, because the way everything ends is fantastic, and I'm not going to say what happens, but I think you're going to enjoy it if you like the combat in this game. If you're expecting wild Kirby lore things to happen, I'm not entirely sure you'll find that here, but this does serve as a great addition to the existing lore in Kirby and the Forgotten Land. But even after you roll credits, the game's not over, because we have a new level of the Ultimate Cup. The Ultimate Cup ZEX, a very Japanese title. They went a lot harder with this final version of the arena than I was expecting. I was expecting all the same bosses from the previous one, in the same state that they were in, and maybe a couple new ones at the end. While it's still not the hardest thing in the world, I appreciate all the effort that went into making this final arena a lot more thrilling than it otherwise would have been. The soundtrack of this game was already good, but some of the new Starcrossed World tracks are absolutely insanely good. I expect to hear a lot of these in the backgrounds of Nintendo YouTube videos in the future. If you already own Kirby and the Forgotten Land and you like the original as much as I did, I don't have any problem recommending the $20 to get this new content. I still think Nintendo should offer performance upgrades for free, but the package you're getting here is great and it is worth the money, in my opinion. If you don't already have Kirby in the Forgotten Land, telling you to spend $80 to get the original game plus the Nintendo Switch 2 version and the new content is a lot harder for me to suggest. I think pricing it at $70 and $10 for the upgrade would be a lot easier of a sell than it is now. But despite all that, I had an absolute blast with Kirby in the Forgotten Land Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus Starcrossed World, and believe this is essential Nintendo Switch 2 software. It's just more of an already great game. And because of that, GVG awards Kirby in the Forgotten Land plus Starcrossed World an 8.5 out of 10. Thanks so much for watching. If you want more Nintendo Switch 2 news, reviews, and everything in between, subscribe here to GVG. We've got a lot more on the way. But until then, keep the games good and the vibes greater. Bye now.